Benjamin Netanyahu was given the sixth term as prime minister for the state of Israel in December of 2022. Tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets exclaiming that a three-time suspected criminal of corruption and bribery was to be voted in again as the prime minister of Israel is nothing short of fucking ludicrous. But fast forward to the current day after the attacks by Hamas on October 7th, the Israeli government and its military have expanded its country's territorial operations to now where it's inside Lebanon and also attacking the West Bank. But to the greater, longer period picture of its own foreign policy programs, Greater Israel extends into Syria and Saudi Arabia, and also south of the country's borders. Now, this would mean that a number of Arab governments from countries like Lebanon and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and even parts of the Gulf, like Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, would have the influence of the Israeli government inside their own governments. Now, as of recent times, this is actually a problem for the United States in the long run because the United States also has a problem with far right ideology currently. And I'm not talking about Donald Trump. Trump is basically just somebody who's willing to pull up the dress to show you what he's got under him. He's a buffoon. He's not a religious sycophant. But the people underneath him are. And the people underneath him are a fractured set of Republicans. And these are people that are pro Israeli and also a smaller component, which are anti Israeli, but they don't have a major voice. Now, when it comes to the Israeli government's influence to lobby money here in the United States, it transcends both Democrat and Republicans. And what I'm about to show you is a chart from the Israeli Public Affairs Committee's influence in the United States government. This is from Open Secrets. So the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, or APAC as it's known, plays both sides of the fence to keep American elected officials on the same page, which means that they are to basically defend Israel at any cost, even in the behest of tens of thousands of Arabs dying, and not just any Arab. These are indigenous citizens to the state of Israel, Palestinians that have been living there for centuries. So if they're willing to do this on the basis of race and religion, well, that means by default, the United States are complicit because they're the ones who are defending them at every facet and every turn, while the entire international theater is condemning the actions of Israel, but the United States is not. And you could see why. Here is a receipt, party receipt from the Democrats and Republicans of the last quarter. And as you can see here, Democrats were paid $24,964,204 by members of APAC. The Republicans were paid $16,398,989 by APAC themselves. Now, remember, the Democrats were in power. Joe Biden was the president. Now it's the other way around. So soon in the next quarter, we're going to see Republicans probably be at the top of the list when it comes to lobby money. Now, when it comes to incumbents, they have spent over 36 million. And when it comes to non-incumbents, they spent 6 million. And you can see there are 135 members of the Democrats, 200 members of Republicans, 0 independents, and when it comes to all independent parties, 335. So no one is spared any expense when it comes to being bribed. Now, as of late, recently, we had an incident involving one Mahmoud Khalil, who is a prominent figure during the Gaza war protests at Columbia University in the spring of 2024, which drew global attention after the Trump administration arrested and moved to deport him. Now, this was a big issue, but it wasn't as big as issue what came later. Because in Khalil's case, which raised a lot of questions about free speech on college campuses and the legal process that would allow for the deportation of a U.S. permanent resident, in which he was, you have far right, conservatives people like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton and Richie Torres, and also people from the Democratic Party like the dumbass John Fetterman and others who are calling for the deportation of an American citizen. Now, Zionist supporters in this country, evangelical Christians, are basically supporting this, not realizing that these stupid motherfuckers are basically saying, hey, the First Amendment can be abused if it's for the right cause. Now, you are not safe. If Khalil is actually deported, if the Supreme Court basically reverses the decision, because I think right now the courts are basically trying to overturn this for obvious fucking reasons, which is the abuse of the First Amendment rights of Mr. Khalil, in which he's afforded to. But the State Department is basically saying that he doesn't afford the natural rights of an everyday citizen because he dared spoke about Israel in a demeaning fashion. So what did the media do? What did the Zionist supporters do? They said that, oh, he's a Hamas supporter, which means by default that he's a criminal. And criminals shouldn't be afforded American rights. Yes, they do. At no point was he a Hamas supporter. In fact, that argument is about as dead in the water as anti-Semitism claims. And the real horrifying reality is this, is that people in the future, Jews, who are going to be persecuted, and they're going to be persecuted by anti-Jews in the future. It's going to happen because this is the way it's lining up now. And the people who are going to be persecuted under anti-Semitism are the ones who have a legitimate claim because they're being subjected to the whims and the actions of anti-Jews, anti-Semites. Now, Khalil is currently in Louisiana following a court hearing on Wednesday where lawyers argued over whether he should be moved back to New York to face deportation charges. Now, Trump, the hypocrite as he is, has repeatedly alleged that the pro-Palestinian activists, including Khalil, support Hamas without any justification for it. In other words, if I told you you're a pedophile, you would be repulsed by it because, for one, I'm just making the charge because I don't need evidence. I could just charge you. And that's exactly what's happening here. A portion of Trump supporters are basically saying, because for the simple fact that Khalil is a Muslim. A lot of Trump supporters are fucking outright racist. They're illiterate, dumb motherfuckers. Anyway, they're basically saying that Muslims in the United States are not afforded the First Amendment. And not only that, we should deport these people because they're criticizing Israel. Well, why are they criticizing Israel in the first place? For obvious fucking reasons. They're killing tens of thousands of their own indigenous citizens. Well, if that doesn't fear you, if this doesn't give you more to concern, let me show you this video. And in fact, let me share the sound along with it. This is on Twitter, all right? And this is coming from Drop Site. And as you can see here, I'm going to make my camera smaller. Breaking. The U.S. Justice Department is examining whether student protests at Columbia University over the genocide in Gaza violated federal terrorism laws, according to this idiot, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. Let me read that slower. The U.S. Justice Department is examining whether student protests at Columbia over the genocide in Gaza, that means that there are massive protests against mass murder by a foreign government supported by the U.S. government, are violating federal terrorism laws. Blanche's department previously said the investigation is also looking into civil rights violations stemming from the administration's expanded definition of anti-Semitism to include criticism of Israel. Again, let me read that slower. Stemming from the administration's expanded definition of anti-Semitism. In other words, we'll just make whatever's up, anti-Semitism, to include criticism of Israel. In other words, criticism of Israel's actions, which are being defined as terrorist by the international criminal courts, as well as the Geneva Conventions, as well as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, and 49 other countries who are signed to the Rome Statutes, which are basically the laws that govern the international criminal courts. And this is what this motherfucker had to say.
The president promised that under his watch, we will no longer stand by while universities tolerate and facilitate anti-Semitism and support of terrorism on their campuses.
At no point did any of these protests basically say, we're doing this because we hate Jews. That would be anti-Semitic. They are actually calling for the international world courts and the United States to act on good faith about stopping the mass murder of its own citizens. Israeli government, by the way, of its own citizens. Because for one, the Palestinians don't have a standing military. Two, they have to rely on, fractured groups who are being paid by governments like Qatar to fund these groups like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, Hezbollah in the West Bank, to stop the Israeli government from forcibly expelling these indigenous population and replacing them with Israeli-owned settlements. That's what's happening here. But at no point were these protests basically saying we hate Jews. Sorry. They're not saying that. They're criticizing the Israeli government. And what the Israeli government basically did through its own lobby money was to get sellouts like Donald Trump and John Fetterman and Hillary Clinton and everybody else to basically defend the murderous actions of Israel. This is where we are in 2025, ladies and gentlemen. We are defending the mass murder of people because these elected officials are being paid money to act in defense of a criminal organization. And I'm going to get to that definition in a minute. Why I'm calling the Israeli government a criminal organization. It's not from what I'm opining. We'll get to that in a minute.
The department's recent actions, which hopefully you've seen at Columbia University in coordination with our law enforcement agency partners, are part of the administration's mission to end anti-Semitism in this country.
No, in other words, what he's basically saying, we're trying to end criticism, public criticism of a criminal organization in Israel. We're going to silence your speech. In other words, we're going to violate the First Amendment. That's what he's basically saying without saying it. Now, with anti-terrorism laws that the Trump administration are looking to expand upon, laws like the USA Patriot Act, which was enacted in 2001, in which expanded the government's surveillance and investigative powers in response to 9/11 attacks. Surveillance and investigation into who? American citizens. Remember, there's a place called the Utah Data Center where all your emails and phone numbers and phone calls and text messages are stored there forever. And for those who are basically saying, I have nothing to hide, that means jack shit. These are people like the NSA who are violating your privacy rights. Another act is the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, in which the act focuses on habeas corpus reform and provided jurisdiction for lawsuits against terrorist states. Now, who gets to dictate who's a terrorist state? The United States. In November of 2001, they enacted a law without the approval of George Bush. This was through the White House legal counsel, like Alberto Gonzales, who basically said, and John Yoo, who basically said, it'll be up to the president to label a terrorist state if he feels that that country or government is supporting terrorism. The Counterterrorism Act. Now, many countries have enacted the counterterrorism laws, such as the United Kingdom's Counterterrorism Act, which allow for restrictions on individuals who are suspected of terrorism-related activities. Suspected. Notice how I'm using words like suspected, thinking, believing. None of this is absolute. These are laws that are meant to basically expand upon the judicial abuse of citizens who may think outside the box and be critical to who? The government of the United States. Now it's expanded upon, and now it's to the criticisms of a foreign government. I cannot stress to you how dangerous this is when you have a United States basically being bribed by a foreign entity in the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee who are acting as representatives of a psychopathic government and implementing laws meant to protect who? Israel and those who support it. And don't forget that the International Criminal Courts, who had announced their arrest warrants for the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and also the former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, in connection with alleged crimes committed in the ongoing armed conflict between Israel and Hamas. And remember, the court rejected Israel's challenge to the court's jurisdiction. In fact, Israel went further. Israel said, not only are we not co-signers of the International Criminal Courts, neither is the United States. I wonder why. Maybe it's because they would be held responsible for the war crimes that both countries commit almost on a daily fucking basis. Is that the court's decisions are not respected by the United States and Israel. Israel even went on to say, we don't care if you have 49 countries. Now I think it's 110 or 115, something like that, who are basically all co-signers of the Rome Statutes, who are, if Netanyahu or Yoav Gallant was to enter these countries, they would have a right to detain them and then have them expelled to Israel, to The Hague to face prosecution. You know what the United States said? The United States basically said, this is the House of Representatives, right? Mike Johnson. They basically said, if Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant were to face justice at the International Criminal Courts, the United States would intervene with its military. I'm not making this shit up. The United States will military invade for a psychopathic government who are in violation of international law. That's what they're saying. Now, this gave rise, all this leniency, all of this silence regarding Israel's crimes gave rise to the most backwards, most depraved people in Israel outside of the Islamic State in Syria or the Islamic Maghreb. And these are people like Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and Osi Yusra, some deranged Kahane woman. These are people that follow the ideology of the late Rabbi Meir Kahane. And Ben Gvir, who is the former, I think, the former national security minister, he annually visits the grave of Rabbi Meir Kahane, who Israel basically deemed a terrorist. Well, now the terrorists are in Israeli government. And like I said, I was going to visit to this point about terrorism inside Israeli government, and these are psychopaths. These are people that believe that Israel has a right to expel or kill Palestinians to basically create an Israeli-owned state. Fuck a two-state solution. And, you know, I'll show you a picture of Ben Gvir actually visiting Rabbi Meir Kahane's grave. And this is actually right here. You can see there's Ben Gvir, the piece of shit. And here is Meir Kahane's grave. And this is a settler. And, you know, these people are the Jewish ISIS. These people believe in a caliphate, a Jewish caliphate. But to expand the borders of Israel, to go beyond Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon. And so, you know, these are people who are in the Israeli government. You would never have thought that at any point would we have the Jewish Defense League basically being represented in the current times in Israel. Meir Kahane is smiling from the nether regions, somewhere and saying, great, because he believes in Jewish supremacy. Now, what is the vision of people like Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich? Well, it's basically a foundational desire to have no non-Jews in the country, especially Muslims. They want them out. And this is by no means exclusive to groups like Jewish Power and the religious Zionist Party. But they believe in the annexation of a very big piece of the puzzle because of their expansionist mindset. And they want to expel every single Palestinian out of the state of Israel. In fact, they are seeking even greater power in the judiciary, in the Knesset. Again, not exclusive to the Jewish power, but it is the very fundamental part of the belief that lends to that God has given them the right to the state of Israel, and that anyone who opposes this has to be utterly destroyed. Now, Israel can't do this on their own, so they need the United States. And thus the reason why they send billions of dollars to bribe and persuade our elected officials, who are nothing more than whores. I am anti-government as can be, and I will say it straight to your face using my real name. I am anti-government. I'm anti-government in the United States and anti-government in the state of Israel, as well as anti-government in Saudi Arabia. The real trifecta of evil, the axis of evil, is the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. No matter how many protests you hear from these dumb Trump supporters, as well as the sellouts who are basically within the Democrat Party, because they're not progressives by any means. And what do these people want? They want religious rule. Ultimately, religious rule with Jewish supremacy at the highest seats of Israeli government. That's what they want. And basically, they're getting it with the silence of the United States. Now, this goes back to my original point of Mahmoud Khalil. Khalil is just the beginning. And for those who are basically saying that he deserves to be deported, well, because you think you're safe by saying that, you're not safe. You're next. And don't you fucking forget it. Because it's not going to stop with Khalil. The supporters of the psychopathic state of Israel, the supporters of the religious Zionist Party and the Ultimate Yehud and all these other Kahane groups who are being supported by the sellouts in the Democrat and Republican Party, they're going to focus their attention on, oh, well, Khalil's not alone. Who else is going to demonize the Israeli government? Oh, someone from New Jersey? Oh, someone from Florida? Someone from California? Someone from Montana? Well, we should imprison these people because they're Hamas supporters. And they don't need to prove that they're Hamas supporters. They just need to say it. And these people who are supporting these psychopaths are going to agree with this because they think every single Democrat is a socialist, anarchist, atheist, secularist, communist. And basically, these are people that hate Israel. And meanwhile, it has nothing to do with any of it. It's the violation of the First Amendment, the basic principles of freedom of speech. And they're going to control it. And they're currently doing that. Now, if the Supreme Court doesn't do anything about it, it's up to us, the people. Well, they're demonizing them too. In fact, there are thousands of people in Lower Manhattan right now, and the media, as well as every single Trump supporter that supports the state of Israel, are calling them Hamas supporters who need to be deported and arrested. This is your everyday American they're doing this to. There are dark fucking times ahead of this country. And if you're not fighting against it, you basically have given up and saying that it's not concerning me. I'm not a Hamas supporter. I don't care what's going on. And like I said before, You're not safe. You're next. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please keep up the fight for humanity, not for some, but for all. See you in the next video.